What if the US dollar stops being the global currency? Couldn't be that big of a deal, right? No, it is a huge deal. Right now, the US dollar is what most of the world uses for trade. People trust the US dollar. It is stable, and the US uses it to pay its very high debts. It has been this way for a very long time, and it has been one reason why the United States has kind of remained the epicenter for economic power around the world. But that's kind of changing. There's this group of big countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They're all rising countries, and they're kind of like, why are we obeying the US dollar? Why don't we create our own currency? These countries represent a huge amount of global trade, so if they decided to make their own currency, other countries might start using it, which would diminish the power of the US dollar and thus the power of the United States. This is just one of many ways we've been looking into that the US-led global order is starting to have some competition, and we're moving into a new Cold War.
Do you know what the Federal Reserve is? It's not the government. It's a company that prints money. It's the central bank for the United States. What's that mean? It means that our money system, our monetary system is all fake. That's why there's all this disruption with digital currency. You need to read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. About 5 bankers got together in the early 1900s, assembled the United States banking cartel known as the Federal Reserve.
My friends, welcome to the Sheep Get Sheared podcast, where here we talk about people, politics, and of course popular culture. I'm your host, the one and only Austin Creed. My friends, today we're talking about the secret war on the US dollar. Now, I'm going to bring up some historical references. I'm going to make this case for why I would say this. But before we really get into that, I want you to know I am not an economist. I am merely someone who knows how to read history and someone who tends to be a little bit ahead of the game for many reasons. Whether you like me or you don't like me, you cannot dispute that. And if you want to try, come on up, and hit me up and we'll see if you can present that case. But my friends, I want you to know that we've always lived through times of economic uncertainty. I don't remember a time, I'm not that old, but I don't remember a time when things were really all that stable for very long. There's always been fluctuations, but within the last 100 years especially, ever since the constructing of the Federal Reserve Act by Congress that was then passed by Woodrow Wilson, largely to pay for World War I, if I'm not mistaken, he was the one, along with the Congress, who changed the course of American history when he created the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, now I want to say this right now, I do not blame the Federal Reserve 100% for this, for anything that I'm about to tell you. The blame never truly lies with one person, one entity, or one organization. It is always a shared group effort. There is never just one person, party to blame. Now, that being said, I want to show this to you. Excuse all the ads on the screen, but here it is. It says, you've probably heard that the US dollar has lost around 97, let me repeat that in case you missed it, 97% of its value since 1913. Give or take a few percentage points depending upon, the source and the pricing ranges and all that. This is a standard line, 97%, that is thrown around throughout discourse about the topic of inflation and money in general. Now, for those of you who went and watched or listened to afterwards the debate, the Republican debate the other night, they addressed inflation. I gotta be honest with you, I understand I'm very cynical, okay? I tend to see things for how they are, not how I wish they were or how they ought to be. So that is why when I say that our political arena is largely just a circus on both sides, and the whole thing is kind of a 3-card Monty where everybody loses and only the people at the top win. I'm not trying to make you sound stupid, although some of you probably are. At the end of the day, here's the problem. This is directly affecting your life, and you're not seeing it. You are seeing the dog and pony show, not the drama that actually affects your life, like the standard of living, the devalue of the dollar, the rising rates of inflation. All these things directly affect your life, and you've seen them play out, whether it's you want to buy groceries, you want to buy gas, you want to go buy a new car, trying to get a mortgage, whatever it is, it's affecting your daily life. Now, let's go back to this article. The year 1913 is by no means an accident either, though the Federal Reserve didn't begin operation until, look at that, early 1914, because it was passed in 1913 by Congress in response to the bank panics. And so they established the central bank. Now, my friends, look, the central bank has advantages, but also very big disadvantages, because capitalism is built off of competition. And when there is no competition, and there's just the people who are basically overlords of the money, that creates they're basically playing God, because let's not pretend for 1 second that the world would continue to go on without money. Our civilization would collapse. There's actually an entire Rick and Morty episode. For those of you who watch Rick and Morty, I love it. I think it's great. It's great satire, great comedy. But my friends, there's an episode about where Rick and Morty, I won't go on too far of a tangent on this, trust me, but there's an episode where they're talking about trying to take down the government, and they're like, oh, are we going to have the nukes target each other? Are we going to have all, their nuclear energy stuff explode? No. He literally sets the currency from 1 to 0. The entire civilization collapses pretty much overnight. Now, my friends, when it comes, what does that have to do with this? Well, it has everything to do with it. Currency affects not only the United States, but the world. Going back to the first video that I showed on the show today, we're not the only country that uses the dollar. There was once a time when the petroleum dollar was a thing. It's largely fizzling out because we're letting Saudi Arabia do it, thanks to Joe Biden. But he's not alone. He's not... Look, it's very easy to just blame Joe Biden for everything. And trust me, I do my fair share of it. But here's the thing. He's not helping by any means, but he didn't cause this. Things have been in the works for a very long time. I would argue ever since 1913, this has really been an inevitable place. But it could have been prevented if not for one thing, which I will discuss with you in a moment. But first, for those of you who don't really know what the Federal Reserve is, here's what Google says. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to address the banking panics, like I said, and provide a safer, more stable financial system. The Federal Reserve was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23, 1913. Now, here are some of the... It says the Federal Reserve was created to do the following. Now, here, I'm going to read you the checklist, and I want you to ask yourself, how are they doing on this? Let's read the list. It says they're supposed to keep inflation low. Well, they're not off to a great start already. Maximize employment. Okay. Improve the flow of money and credit throughout the United States. Now, this is an interesting point. Improve the flow of money. Now, this is the point for me that has really been, that you would be very, very quick to overlook and focus more on economic calamities and severe financial crises. Those jump out at you more. But this one, the third one, improve the flow of money and credit throughout the United States. Well, sounds benign, right? Sounds reasonable, right? Yeah, everybody wants the flow of money to keep going. Yeah, everybody wants good credit, right? Everybody wants opportunities, right? Well, when they say the flow of money, I want you to close your eyes if you have the ability to do so. If you're driving, obviously don't do it. But if you have the ability to do it, I want you to close your eyes and picture the flow of money as a river, right? And the Federal Reserve is the dam that controls the outflow of the water, which is money, into the stream, down to the village being the people, us, where we live. Now, it's really easy for them to just kind of control the spigot. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Sounds really straightforward, really easy, right? Well, you're not taking into account the engineers who kind of keep the reserve in check and can manipulate it. That would be your friends in the government. Now, your friends in the government tend to like to spend money that is not theirs. ergo the public treasury, the tax money, right? This is how inflation happens, is when they flood the river that we just saw in our heads. They flood the river, trying to prevent any kind of drought, any kind of uncertainty. They just flood the banks of the river, which would be the economy that is supposed to keep it streamlined as much as possible. Instead, it gets flooded, which is a ton of money. Is really good because there's more water, there's more to go around, and people are happy initially. But then, when the costs of living, the costs of doing business, and all these things catch up, suddenly the extra money backfires on you. This all goes back to, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Now, that is something that most people don't have the foresight to see because they don't care about it, or they don't think it through until it stares them in the eyes, and then they try to negotiate with it. No. You can't negotiate with calamity. It's already happening to you. It's too late. Let's see. The Federal Reserve is the nation's central bank. In other words, it doesn't have competition because it's sanctioned. It manages monetary policy and regulates the financial system. It sets interest rates, influencing the supply of money, like we just said, to the economy. It influences, in other words, it prints money. It has the power to print money, along with the help of the government, and the government's the one who spends the money. Don't you see how that might be a little bit of a conflicting relationship? The Federal Reserve, look, the Federal Reserve could say no. I mean, absolutely, they could. But do you really think that the government wouldn't then retaliate? Of course they would. So here's the thing. It's not the Federal Reserve's job to say no to the government. I mean, they should, ideally, but they don't have to. It's in their best interest to just listen to the government and then play damage control afterwards. Now, they're supposed to maximize employment, provide stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. Now, let me ask you something. Do you feel like this prices are stable? Do you feel like your employment's been maximized? Do you think that the interest rates are moderate? The answer is no. And when you look at how the central bank tends to play God with the help of the government. Now, I don't want to go off too much of a tangent here, but I will indulge myself for just a second, and I think you'll enjoy it. Now, this is why I hate communism. I hate communism because when there is no God, what do you think then becomes the de facto God? If according to communists, God is an opium of the masses, which is what Karl Marx said. God is like a drug to people, which means that God must not be real. So if God is not real, riddle me this, my friends, who becomes then the next rung on the totem pole for power? The government. Now, when the government becomes God, the government becomes all-powerful. And when the government becomes all-powerful, guess what you have? A de facto dictatorship that is essentially going back to the divine right of kings that was used in Europe all those years ago. It's just a different form, a different flavor of the same thing. Now, I want to share this with you. Here. It says, central banks and the problem with playing God. Now, again, I don't blame the Federal Reserve for everything. I would be foolish to do that. It is a joint effort. You're being screwed on all fronts. This is why I say that the Republican debates are largely a farce, because we all know that Trump's the forerunner, and we all know that because he's the one being persecuted. If the people in power actually thought that anybody on that stage was a threat, they would have already dealt with them. Or buy them out in the case of Vivek Ramaswamy, who got money from George Soros' brother in the form of a scholarship to go to law school at Yale. Look it up. It's real. I didn't make it up. Now, people then want to tell me, oh, well, George Soros endorsed Ron DeSantis. Well, of course, didn't endorse him, but he said that he was the only one that really had a chance of winning. Well, of course he did, because he knows that if he does that, people are more likely to question him, and it goes all the way down the line. You could make all the arguments you want, but here's what I want to get down to. We're going off on the wrong tangent here. Now, I want to read this quote for you. For me, this is what drove this article home. Look, I'll read this for you. It says, indeed, the reach and influence of central banks has never been higher, one could argue. Initially, being lenders of last resorts for banks, they have also mutated into dealers of last resort for all kinds of shadowy banking institutions residing outside official banking regulations. Today, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and other central banks around the world have to see to the stability of the entire financial system by catering to the liquidity needs of these shadow banks, even though they have developed and grown outside the central bank's purview. I'll explain all this in a second. I want to read all the way through. Many proponents argue that central banks are a lot like the fire corps coming to quench the fires. And as the governor of the Bank of Canada has stated, a firefighter has never been criticized for using too much water. Now, I guarantee you some people turned off the show because they didn't understand a word I just said. But here, I'll explain it for you. There was a time, so I'll bring up the fire corps example and make it a little more simple, okay? The fire corps, so the firefighter institution was created by Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was the kind of the forefather of the civics, creating the fire department and all that kind of stuff. So, but there was a time when the people were questioning whether the firefighters were relevant. We don't need these people, right? I mean, we're not really having any fires. We're overpaying them. We don't need them, right? Well, then the firefighters would then, allegedly, they would go set fires so they could put them out to prove they were necessary. That is what he is saying that the bank does, the central banks do. They will often intentionally or unintentionally cause economic disruption or crises that they will be called upon to fix. And when they come to fix it, they're not criticized for just dumping money on the problem until much, much later, which then they can pass the buck to the government. You may disagree with that interpretation, but that is your right to do so. Here's another quote I wanted to read you. I will read this as well. It says, our economy, like so many other things in life, is a complex adaptive order. That's why I say that no one party is responsible for this breakdown of the secret war on the U.S. dollar. It's a joint effort. Variables are unknown, and even if they were known at some point in time, because of the adaptive nature of the system, variables constantly change unexpectedly, making precise measurements virtually impossible. The economy is very hard to actually measure. The economy is difficult to quantify because there's so many dimensions to it and factors that are hard to very distinctively measure. It was Peter Drucker, who perfectly described a central bank's situation. And here's what he says, quote, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. That is a great quote, by the way. Fantastic quote. I love that. Fantastic quote right here. Now, my friends, I want you to know that the value of the dollar is decreasing and your cost of living is increasing. That is a fact of reality, and that is why some people say we are in a silent depression. Because back in the Great Depression, people were making more money and the cost of goods were lower, adjusting for inflation, of course, than we have right now. And of course, no one in the government will actually say we are in a depression because then it makes them look bad. And they can point to the numbers that they have manipulated and taken out and rearranged factors to tell you that we're not in one, when in fact anyone who could actively say that is ridiculous and knows nothing. Now, another dimension of this that is not discussed enough is the gold standard, but I will save that for another time. We're already going over time in this video today. I'll discuss the gold standard another time, but it was Nixon who took us off the gold standard. The gold standard is what gave You know what? I'll just show you. I'll give you a brief little teaser. Here it is. The gold standard is what backed your dollar up. Your dollar used to be worth its weight in gold. That's why things were worth 50 cents, a dollar, a nickel. That's why it was worth that, because you could trade in that nickel for its weight in gold. Now, you can't do that because the government doesn't work that way anymore. Now, like everything else, it has benefits and drawbacks. The benefit is there's more money. Downside, that money is worth less, and it's called a fiat currency, which means that it's basically only worth as much as people place value in it. Kind of like crypto, where crypto only has value because people perceive it to have value. That's how it works. And that's why inflation and fiat currencies usually have a shelf life, and we're getting pretty close to ours. But my friends, I want to know what you have to say about the secret war on the US dollar, because I do not understand how anybody could look me in the eye and tell me that there's no conflict or war going on around the dollar. There is. There's economic warfare being waged all over the world right now, and just because you're not seeing it on CNN or MSNBC or on Fox News does not mean that it's not happening. It just means that you're not seeing it. But my friends, I want to hear what you have to say, because I am not an expert on this. I'm merely able to read and put together coherent thoughts and are a student of history. If you are an expert, I would love to hear what you have to say, but please provide your credentials. I don't just say, according to experts. I don't know what that means. Give me actual ethos. Establish an ethos, for God's sakes. Saying you're an expert is not an ethos appeal. Doesn't fly, at least not with me. But my friends, I want to hear what you have to say, because I'm sure that you have a lot to say on this issue, because this affects everybody. My friends, until next time, God bless you, God bless your family, and God bless America. We're out of here. Peace.